In the cold northern reaches of Scandinavia, where the wind howled through the pine forests and the sea smashed against rocky fjords, the Viking world thrived. But beneath the glory of raiding and the poetry of skalds, there lay a grim truth rarely sung in sagas, the horrors of Viking medicine. Let us now drift back through time, back to the longhouses lit dimly by firelight, where the sick groaned on straw mats and the wounded warriors bled onto fur rugs. This is not a tale of healing miracles, but of pain, trial, and strange remedies. Let the tale begin. Chapter 1. The Village Healer. In every Viking village, there was someone who knew healing. Not a doctor, not a physician, but perhaps an old woman, hunched with age, her fingers stained by herbs and blood. She was the Leikner, the healer. Some whispered she was a witch. Others came crawling to her when the gods gave no mercy. Her tools were simple: knives of bone or iron, a bowl of cold water, herbs hung from the rafters, and thick linen rags. When someone was wounded in battle or fell from a roof, they were brought to her hut, limp and pale. There the true horror began. Chapter 2. Surgery without mercy. Imagine this: a deep axe wound to the thigh, muscle torn, blood everywhere. The healer, with shaking hands, takes a rusty iron blade heated in the fire, not to disinfect it, but to cauterize the wound shut. No anesthetic, no antiseptic, just the patient biting a piece of leather, screaming into the night. Sometimes the wound had to be stitched, but Viking stitches weren't neat or clean. Animal sinew or coarse linen thread was driven through the flesh with a sharp bone needle. The pain? Unimaginable. And infection was nearly certain. They believed wounds festered because of bad spirits or displeased gods, not bacteria. So they'd pour onion paste into cuts or press moss soaked in urine onto injuries. Yes, urine, often from cows, which they believed could cleanse the wound. Sometimes it worked. Often it did not. Chapter 3. Broken bones and brutality. A broken arm? It would be straightened with brute strength, the bones yanked into alignment by strong hands. A stick, maybe a whalebone, was tied along the limb with leather thongs. No sedatives, just pain, groans, and prayer. Skull fractures were even worse. Vikings sometimes practiced trepanation, cutting a hole in the skull to release bad spirits or relieve pressure. A sharp rock or blade would be used to scrape or drill through the scalp and bone. Remarkably, some survived. The bone healed, but many simply faded into death. Chapter 4. Herbs, Charms, and Blood. Herbs were the healer's only allies. Yarrow, angelica, and mugwort were brewed into teas or mashed into poultices. They believed these herbs had power, not just to soothe, but to ward off evil. When someone was truly ill, feverish, coughing, wasting away, the healer would recite Gald or magical chants whispered to the gods. Runes would be carved on driftwood and soaked in the patient's water. Some patients got better, some did not. Bloodletting was also practiced. A cut to the arm to let the sickness out. Leeches? Rare. More often they used knives. If the patient became weak, they said it was working. If the patient died, they said the gods had chosen. Chapter 5. The Viking Dentist. Toothache? Too bad. There were no clean instruments, no dentists. If a tooth was rotting, it might be pulled out with pliers or a dagger. No numbing, just blood and agony. Some Viking warriors filed their teeth for decoration, grinding grooves into the enamel. They believed it made them fierce. But the risk of infection was high. And the pain? You can imagine. Chapter 6. Childbirth and Death. Perhaps the most dangerous time in a Viking woman's life was childbirth. No hospitals. No sterilized tools. Just the midwife and a prayer. If the baby came breech or the mother bled too much, death hovered near. Some midwives used carved stones or hung charms above the bed to ward off spirits. Sometimes the baby was born healthy. Sometimes both mother and child passed into the afterlife. Chapter 7. The End and the Pyre. For those who could not be healed, death was slow and quiet. The healer might sing to them, placing herbs on their chest and whispering to the gods. When they finally passed, they were placed on a wooden pyre or buried with tools and trinkets. But death was not always feared. The Vikings believed in Valhalla, a warrior's afterlife. For some, death was better than the pain of the healer's hut. And so, dear listener, we leave the world of Viking medicine, a realm of fire-heated blades, blood-soaked bandages, and half-whispered spells. Their knowledge was limited, but their courage was vast. They faced pain with gritted teeth and hope in the gods. Now, let the flames of the longhouse flicker low. Let your mind drift past the pain and into dreams. For this chapter of history, as brutal as it was, is done. Chapter 8. The Sick House of the Jarl. In larger Viking settlements, where the halls of the Jarls stood tall and the walls were carved with dragon head beams, there sometimes existed a separate house, a place for the wounded and the sick. Not a hospital in the modern sense, but a dim room filled with straw, sour smoke, and the quiet groans of warriors too broken to move. They called it the Sjukrahus, though it had no physicians. The air was heavy with damp wool, herbs left to rot, and the sharp metallic scent of blood. Warriors who had returned from raids with cracked ribs, severed fingers, or festering arrow wounds were laid side by side like logs in a lumberyard. The healer would pass between them with her bundle of dried herbs tied in animal gut, sometimes burning sage to purify the air. She had no chart, no diagnosis, only instinct and memory, and the memory was carved from pain. One warrior, barely more than a boy, had taken a sword blow to the belly. His intestines pushed outward like pale ropes. He lay moaning, clutching a wooden idol of Thor in one hand. The healer, with a calm face and trembling hands, pressed the organs back inside with linen soaked in a thick herbal paste. She stitched the skin closed using horsehair and ash, mumbling charms to keep the spirits away. Whether he lived or died, no one would know until morning. Chapter 9. The Blind Seer and the Healing Curse. In the eastern fjords, there was talk of a blind man who could heal with his voice. They said he had lost his eyes to fever as a child, yet gained visions from the gods in return. When the wounded were brought to him, he touched their heads with fingers marked by soot and whispered in the old tongue, not Norse, but something more ancient. Some said he saw the illness, saw it, like a living shadow clinging to the flesh. He refused silver. Instead, he asked for blood, a prick of the finger, a drop from the lip. This was the price for his chant. One story tells of a chieftain's son who could no longer speak or walk. The healers had given up. So he was taken to the blind seer, who chanted over him for 3 days and 3 nights, drawing runes on his chest with ash and mead. On the 4th morning, the boy spoke, but in a tongue no one recognized. He wept, then fell into a sleep that lasted a week. When he awoke again, he was whole. Some say it was a miracle. Others say it was a curse. Chapter 10. The Cold Touch of Death. In the Viking world, death was not always an enemy. Sometimes it was the only cure. When a wound turned black and smelled foul, when the skin bubbled and the fever wouldn't break, the people would begin to whisper, "Hell is near." Hel, the goddess of the underworld, daughter of Loki, ruled over those who died sick, old, or dishonorably. It was said that when she stretched out her hand, the temperature in the room dropped, and the birds stopped singing. The dying were wrapped in furs and laid facing north, toward the realm of hell. Coins were placed on their tongues, though not for a ferryman. The Vikings had no river Styx. The coins were offerings, bribes to the goddess to make the passing swift. Some believed that if you screamed at death, you'd wander the spirit world lost. So the brave stayed silent as the fever took them, their breath slow and shallow, their eyes fixed on nothing. The healer would close the eyes with her fingers and bind the mouth shut with a cloth soaked in elderflower. Outside, the dogs howled. Chapter 11. The Bloodstained Runes. There were darker healers, those who walked outside the laws of gods and men. They used blodtrunner, or blood runes, carved not with knives, but with bone splinters soaked in the blood of crows. They did not ask the gods for healing. They commanded it. These rune priests would make their patients drink bitter concoctions of mushrooms, bark, and rot weed. The potion would induce dreams, hallucinations, and vomiting. But in these visions, it was said, the sickness could be seen and struck down. Sometimes the sick awoke laughing. Sometimes they screamed and tore their own faces. These rituals were forbidden in most places, but in the dark woods and forgotten islands, the old ways still lived. Chapter 12. The Winter Plague. Then came a time of darkness, a winter longer than most. Crops failed, fish vanished from the sea, and the sickness came, fast, cold, merciless. It began with coughing, then bleeding from the gums, then black spots on the skin. The healer had no answer. The seers fell silent. The gods gave no signs. The people began to burn their dead in the fields, weeping as they watched their kin turn to smoke. Some said it was punishment. Others said it was the end of the world, Ragnarok. But the sickness passed, and those who survived never forgot. They carved stories on stone, on bone, on walls of their halls, of the year the sickness came, when even the bravest feared to breathe. Chapter 13. The Eternal Sleep. In the end, all Viking healing, whether of blade, herb, or rune, led to one thing: sleep. Sleep was the only true mercy. When the pain grew too strong, the healer would brew a heavy tea made from black henbane, a poisonous plant, just enough to numb the body, to hush the mind, to carry the soul softly toward the next world. The fire would be stoked, furs pulled tight, prayers whispered over the brow, and then stillness. Outside, the snow would fall quietly over the longhouse, burying the scent of death. The stars above would watch in silence, knowing that the world would turn again, and the stories of pain would become stories of strength. And now, dear listener, let your eyes grow heavy. Let the wind of the northern world blow gently at your door. The horrors are behind you. Only sleep remains. Chapter 14. The Viking Midwives and the Birth of Blood. In the low-lit corners of Viking homes, built of timber, turf, and thick woolen curtains, there was no louder scream than the cry of a woman giving birth. No battlefield echoed with such raw agony. And yet, it was not warriors, but midwives who stood bravest in these moments. They were called Wuljesmer, light mothers, bringers of life into the dark, dangerous world. These midwives carried no silver scalpels, no shining instruments. Their tools were carved bone, sharpened stone, and worn hands stained with mead, sweat, and blood. A birthing stool, shaped of oak and carved with old runes, was their altar. When the time came, the family gathered. The house grew silent. Even the men, hardened by raids and death, dared not approach. A woman giving birth was between two worlds, one foot in the realm of the living, the other drifting toward death. The midwife would bind her hair tightly, wrap her arms in linen, and place iron under the bed, for it was believed iron frightened away evil spirits. A small carved idol of Freya, the goddess of fertility, was placed near the head of the mother. Then the labor began. Hours passed, sometimes days. No medicine. No sleep, only pain. If the baby came feet first, the midwife would reach inside with oiled fingers, whispering prayers to the gods as she turned the child. If the mother began to bleed too early, the midwife would burn herbs, mugwort, yarrow, and juniper to call back the blood. And yet, many did not survive. The mother's skin would go pale, her eyes roll back, and her breath fade with the dawn. The midwife would wrap the child in wool, press her lips to its head, and then close the mother's eyes. In the dark silence, she would sing, not to the child, to the dead. Chapter 15. The Bonecutter's Apprenticeship. Elsewhere, in a rocky village near the sea, a boy watched his master with wide, terrified eyes. The old healer, known as the Bone Cutter, had no name. He had saved hundreds, perhaps ruined just as many. His hands were missing 2 fingers. His beard was white, stained yellow from pipe smoke. His hut smelled of sea brine, herbs, and blood. "You must learn to cut, boy," he said one night. "Not just meat, but soul." He showed the apprentice how to set a dislocated shoulder using 2 stones and a lever, how to amputate a toe with 1 clean blow from a sharpened wedge. The apprentice vomited more than once. One day, a man was brought in with a shattered knee, crushed by a fallen tree. The flesh was black. The rot had begun. The master handed the boy the blade. "You want to heal? Then hurt." The boy, with shaking hands, cut through muscle, tendon, and bone. He screamed louder than the patient. But he did it. That night, the boy could not sleep. The old man sat beside him and said softly, "The gods don't care if we cry. But the dead, they remember who tried." Chapter 16. Healing in the Deep Woods. Not all healers lived among the people. Some were wild, reclusive. They lived in the forests, in huts of moss and bone, where crows circled overhead and wolves howled beneath the trees. These were the wood wives, the marg or the hidden ones, half feared, half revered. People went to them only in desperation, when all else had failed. They brewed dark teas from bark and mold. They tattooed runes onto the chest to trap the sickness. They placed small bones under the tongue, saying it would fool the spirits. One traveler spoke of a woman whose arm had turned green from a battle wound. The woodwife placed leeches on it, rubbed it with fermented cow milk, then smeared it with fat from a bear's heart. The woman survived. Her arm didn't. The woodwife burned the severed limb in a circle of carved stones. She said nothing, just pointed to the sky and whispered, "It was not I who saved her. It was the trees." Chapter 17. The Madness of the Moon. In the Viking Age, there was no word for mental illness as we know it, but they saw it and feared it. Some said it was the moon, that its pull on the mind was like the tide on the sea. Those who screamed at shadows, who clawed at their skin or wandered into the cold barefoot, were said to be moonsick, touched by Manavin, the moon ghost. They were locked inside huts or chained to posts. Others were taken to seers who sang to them by firelight and placed runes on their tongues. Some drank fly agaric mushrooms, hoping to see visions that would break their madness. Some were beaten in an attempt to drive out the spirit, but some were simply cast out. They wandered the frostbitten hills alone, whispering to trees, laughing at snow, singing to the stars. And sometimes they came back with knowledge, and sometimes they didn't come back at all. Chapter 18. The Dream Sleep. It was said in the far north, where ice never melted and the sun did not rise in winter, there lived a healer who could place people into dream sleep, a trance between life and death. He used a blend of herbs, poppy, nightshade, wild rye. He would paint the patient's face with blue clay, then chant until their eyes closed, and they passed into a deep, endless sleep. Some awoke days later, healed. Others never opened their eyes again. It was a gamble, a prayer, a final hope, and yet many took it, for pain was a crueler master than death. Chapter 19. The Plague Ships of the North. There came a time when the sea betrayed them. From distant lands, Francia, the Anglo-Saxon shores, the Russ rivers, the Vikings returned home not with gold, but with death hiding in their ships. They did not know its name. They called it the breath of hell, or corpse wind. It started with a fever. Then came the swellings, large, dark lumps in the neck, the armpits, the groin, boils that pulsed and wept foul black blood. The afflicted would cough, then choke, and finally collapse, stiff and cold. It was not a war they could win with axe or shield. Villages that once echoed with laughter and the hammering of iron grew silent. Doors were nailed shut. Fires burned low. Wolves crept closer each night, for they smelled the rot. It was the time of the plague ships. These were longships, once proud raiders, now drifting home with torn sails and dead men frozen at the oars. Some ships ran aground on rocky shores. Others were found bobbing silently in the fjords, carrying only crows and the stench of death. The brave, or the mad, boarded these ships, searching for signs, for causes, for answers. They found none, just rotting meat, half-eaten food, and bones chewed by rats. Chapter 20. The Silent Settlements. There are tales, whispered, not written, of entire settlements that vanished overnight. The village of Skjoldvik, nestled in a green valley near the Western Sea, was one such place. It was once home to 30 families, a proud ring fort, and a stone temple carved with serpent gods. When traders passed by one summer's eve, they saw smoke rising, but no sound. When they entered the village, not a soul stirred. Food still cooked over hearths. Tools were left in hands. Children's toys lay in the grass. But every soul was gone, or dead, mouths open, eyes wide, staring at nothing. The only survivor was a dog, half-starved, who barked at the sky for hours until its voice failed. Some believed the gods had punished the village. Others said something came with the mist. The truth? No one dared speak it. The place was cursed, abandoned. The forest crept back over the homes. To this day, locals call it Draugr, the home of the dead. Chapter 21. The Corpse Burners. With so many dying, even the old funeral rites began to falter. There were no songs, no drinking horns raised, just fire and fear. The Vikings had always burned their dead with honor. Now they burned them out of desperation. The corpse burners were chosen, sometimes volunteered, often forced. Wrapped in wet wool and wearing masks of moss and cloth soaked in vinegar, they dragged the bodies to great pyres built on the edge of the forests. They lit them with whale oil and pitch. The flames turned black, and the smell was thick, choking, unforgettable. No one spoke to the burners afterward. Some say their hair turned white within weeks. Others never stopped shaking. One man, a strong blacksmith named Bjorn, burned over 100 bodies in 1 week. On the 7th night, he walked into the fire and never screamed. They said he saw something in the eyes of the dead, something he could not forget. Chapter 22. The Sea Healer's Pact. Far north, where ice never melted, there lived a woman called Ursa the Salt-Tongued. She was no ordinary healer. She lived alone, near the edge of the sea, where whales washed ashore and the wind sang in tongues no man spoke. It was said she once made a pact with Aegir, the sea giant, offering him her voice in exchange for the power to cure what men could not name. Those who sought her came at night, bringing offerings, pearls, fish teeth, scraps of silver, and their dying loved ones. Ursa would place the sick on a bed of seaweed, bind their feet in kelp, and pour icy seawater over them while chanting in a language lost to time. Some rose healed. Some drowned in their sleep. Some rose different, silent, pale, eyes too bright, as though part of the sea had stayed with them. Villagers whispered that she no longer aged, that she hadn't blinked in years. But still they kept coming. Chapter 23. The Trial of the Gods. As the plague stretched on, and the healers failed, the people turned to the gods, not in prayer, but in rage. In the great temple at Uppsala, where sacrifices were once given with honor and joy, the rituals grew darker. They hung oxen, then horses, then thieves, then, finally, the sick. If they are cursed, the priest said, let them carry the curse back to hell. The gods did not answer. The skies remained gray. And so the people cried louder, carving runes into their own flesh, offering blood from their veins, teeth from their mouths. Some even sacrificed their own children, believing only the pure could cleanse the land. But the plague did not stop, and in time, the gods themselves were feared. Chapter 24. The Final Cold. It is said that after 3 years, the plague faded, not with a miracle, but with winter. A winter so long and cold, even the sickness froze in its tracks. Snow buried the villages. Ice shattered ships in the harbors. Wolves turned on each other. Birds stopped flying, but the dying stopped dying. Those who survived crawled from their hovels, blinking at the sunless sky, their bones thin, their eyes hollow. They did not sing. They did not feast. They simply began again, rebuilding with ash-covered hands, planting in frozen soil, lighting fires that barely warmed the soul. And they whispered the stories of the ships, the sickness, the bones, the fire. They passed those stories to their children and their children's children, and so they were never forgotten. Now, dear listener, the night grows long, and the past lies heavy upon the air. The horrors of Viking medicine, of blood and rune, fire and frost, echo still in the old stones and deeper dreams. Let your eyes drift closed. Let the wind carry you away, for this tale is not yet done. Chapter 31. The Bone Lantern and the Deathwalkers. Long after the plague had passed and the fires of mourning had burned down to embers, strange lights began to appear in the northern grave fields. They called them bone lanterns, pale blue flames that hovered just above the burial mounds at night. Not fire, not ghost, but something older. Something watching. The villagers whispered that these were Voker, the spirits of the unrest dead, not the honored ancestors, but those who had died in pain, forgotten, or cursed. It began with small things. Tracks in the snow where no man had walked. Doors found open in the morning. Cattle dead with no wounds. Then came the Deathwalkers. They were not Draugr, not the bloated, violent undead of legend. These moved silently, robed in mist, faces hidden beneath deer skulls or masks carved from bone. They appeared only in moonlight, and they did not kill. They took. One man lost the memory of his son. Another woke to find his shadow no longer attached. Children spoke in voices not their own. And always the blue light flickered near. The people turned to the last healers, to the old women who remembered the runes carved not in stone but in bone. They were told to light fires of pine sap and crow feathers, to sleep in circles of ash, and to bury a piece of their own hair near the grave mound. But nothing truly stopped the Deathwalkers, because they were not spirits of vengeance. They were harvesters. and something had awakened them. Chapter 32. The 13th Rune. The sagas speak of 16 runes, sacred symbols given to Odin through pain and sacrifice. But there was a 13th forgotten rune, never taught, never carved into stone. It was whispered only by the mad. It was known as Spheron, the rune of turning. It did not heal. It reversed. One boy in the east, dying of fever, had it drawn onto his forehead with blood mixed from 3 animals, raven, wolf, and eel. He screamed for 9 hours straight. Then he sat up, alive, strong, hungry. But he could no longer speak his own name. He knew every word in the old tongue. He knew how the stars moved. He knew when others were about to die. But he was no longer just a boy. Those who use the 13th rune are never the same. Their eyes become pale. Their blood runs cold. Their reflection wavers. And every night, in dreams, they see the face of a man hanging upside down, one eye missing, whispering secrets no one should ever hear. Chapter 33. The Bone Book. It was not bound in leather, nor written on parchment. It was carved into bones. Rib bones, femurs, jawbones, stacked and wrapped in sinew, the letters etched with obsidian and sealed with bear fat. No one knew who made it, only that it was passed from hand to hand, never staying in one place long. Those who read from the bone book learned forgotten things. How to stitch wounds closed with spider silk. How to brew teas that let the soul leave the body for a while. How to bind a sickness to an animal, then release it into the woods. But each time a spell was read, a part of the reader's body changed. A man grew feathers along his arms. A woman's skin turned bark-like. One healer grew a 3rd eye in the center of her palm and used it to see the truth of people's hearts. The bone book never stayed. It vanished one night, as it always did. Some say it returns only when the world is sick again. Others say it waits, buried beneath a grave where no one was ever laid. Chapter 34. The Sleeping God. There is a mountain in the far northeast, where the snow never melts and no grass grows. It is called Djupafjall, the Deep Mountain. The locals never go there. Not for firewood. Not for hunting. Not even to flee war. They say beneath that mountain sleeps something that is not man, not God, not ghost. A healer once ventured there, seeking power to cure a child who could not wake. She carved her way into the stone tunnels, lighting her way with tallow and runes. She did not return for 7 years. When she did, she was no older. She carried the child in her arms, healthy, smiling, unaware. But her eyes were pure white, and she never spoke again. On her back, tattooed in spirals of ink and scar, was a message in the old tongue. I saw a dream, and it dreamed of silence. Chapter 35. The Healing That Ended the World. At the end of this age of shadows and fire, the greatest healer who ever lived was born. Her name was a child of the Ashen Hills. She healed blind men with whispers. She cured plague with her hands. She raised a man who had drowned for 3 days. The people began to call her Vitamir, the White Mother. But she refused temples, refused worship, refused wealth. She said only, "I take pain so others don't." No one asked what that meant, until one day, her skin began to split, not with wounds, but with faces. the faces of those she had healed. They whispered in unison. They begged to return. They cried for the pain she had taken. And then she vanished. They say the earth shook, that all the fires died out for a day and a night, that a scream echoed across the fjords louder than any storm. No one ever found her. But sometimes, when a healing is too easy, too fast, too perfect, they say the White Mother still walks the world. But she is no longer alone. The saga rests once more. Close your eyes now. Let the runes sleep, the lanterns dim, and the snow fall quiet. The horrors of Viking healing still whisper beneath the frost, waiting to be remembered. Chapter 36. The Ice Temple and the Last Blood Priest. Far to the north, beyond the jagged glaciers and across the Sea of Knives, stood a place older than the oldest saga, a temple carved directly into a mountain of ice. They called it Bloff, the Blood Temple. It had no doors, no roof, no priests left to tend it. Only a frozen archway that opened for those who carried pain in their blood. Once, long ago, the Bloff had been tended by 12 healers, all sworn to the god V, the silent brother of Odin, keeper of forbidden knowledge. These 12 were known not for saving life, but for mastering the power between life and death. When the plague swept the land, and fire burned out the sickness, the priests of Bloff vanished. All but one, Jarnjorn, the last blood priest. His skin was pale as the ice he lived in. His beard was white with frost. His eyes were dark, not black, but empty, like the space between stars. He spoke only once a year, during the deepest night, and only to those who came with offerings not of gold or food, but of suffering. A man came once, crawling with broken legs, carrying the body of his stillborn child. Jarnjorn took the child into the temple, and the father was told to wait. He waited 3 days. When the priest returned, the child was alive, laughing, eyes bright. But the father could no longer speak. His tongue was gone, his memory scattered like leaves in wind. He no longer remembered who the child was, and still he smiled. Chapter 37. The Vain Tree. South of the temple, in a forest where the snow never touched the ground, stood a single tree, tall, black, and pulsing. Its bark was not wood, but something like flesh. Its roots whispered when the wind passed. Birds avoided it. So did wolves. So did men. Except the sick. They came alone, carrying small cups carved from horn. They would sit before the tree and wait, and wait, and wait. If the tree accepted them, a branch would lower, and from it would drip a thick, red sap, warm to the touch, tasting like rust and ash. They would drink. Some would fall into sleep and awaken whole. Others would never awaken. And once, just once, the tree moved. A man tried to cut it to take the sap by force. He was never found. But the next morning, the snow around the vain tree was red, and the tree taller. Chapter 38. The Whispering Helm. Among the artifacts of old Viking magic, blades that glowed, cloaks that vanished in shadow, there was none more feared than the Whispering Helm. Forged not of iron, but of human bone and hardened frost, the helm was said to contain the voices of every healer who had ever died in failure. It was kept hidden in the deepest vault of a ruined stronghold beneath the mountains, locked behind runes no skald would recite. But one day, a healer named Thora, desperate to save her village from a curse that turned flesh to stone, found it. She placed it upon her head. Immediately, her eyes turned black. Her mouth bled, and the whispers began. They told her how to stop the curse, with herbs grown only in moonlight and the blood of someone who had never spoken a lie. She did it. She saved them. But when she removed the helm, her ears were gone. She had no voice, only the whispers. They never stopped. She now wanders the coast in silence, carrying a bag of herbs and bones, healing those who ask, and bleeding from her ears each time she does. Chapter 39. The Throatless Woman. Long ago, there was a woman born without a voice box. No sound ever escaped her lips. She was considered cursed, abandoned to die in the woods. But the spirits found her. Not gods, not ghosts. Spirits, wild things older than Asgard, crawling beneath the roots of the world. They taught her to speak without sound. She learned the tongue of trees, the language of crows, the breath runes carried by wind. She returned to her village as a healer, and without a word, she cured 1,000 sicknesses. Her greatest act was this. When a child was born whose heart did not beat, she kissed its forehead, and her silence entered the child. The heartbeat began. But the child never spoke a word in his life. He grew to be the greatest skald the North had ever known, because silence, he said, was the oldest language of all. Chapter 40. The Day the Dead Gave Advice. There is one final tale in this chapter of horror and wonder, a tale few believe, yet all remember. It happened during the Red Winter, when food was gone, and even the rivers bled. A desperate village gathered at their burial field and cried into the snow, begging their dead for help. That night, the wind stopped, the trees held still, and from the ground the dead answered, not with speech, with action. The next morning, the snow was cleared in a perfect circle. At the center was a message, written in ash and pine needles. Burn the wheat. Drink the fire. Let the fever burn itself. They did. They lit a great fire and inhaled the smoke from the sacred wheat, once thought cursed. Within days, the sick began to heal. Not all, but enough. And when they returned to the field to thank the dead, the graves were gone. Only smooth, undisturbed earth remained, and a single raven feather in the snow. Now the night grows still again. Let your breath ease. Let your thoughts drift far into the icebound past. The healers sleep. The fires smolder. The tales are carved into the wind, but their power still lingers. Chapter 41. The Mask of the Leech King. In the shadow of the Black Fjord, where the tides hissed like dying serpents and gulls dared not cry, there stood a half-sunken hall. Locals called it Eiterheimer, the home of poison. It was said that no one built the place, and no one remembered it rising. It simply appeared one winter's eve, formed of bone-colored stone and driftwood bound with sinew. There, inside, lived a man who wore no name. He was called only the Leech King. They said he had no face of his own, only a mask carved from the skull of a drowned berserker, bleached by salt and rimmed in gold. Through its hollow eyes, he saw every illness, not just in the flesh, but in the soul. He spoke with a voice like wet rope. Those who came to him for healing never left unchanged. A woman came, her arms blistered with a plague none could name. The Leech King examined her in silence, then plunged his fingers into a jar of leeches, each the size of a child's thumb, squirming, black and blind. He placed them on her throat, her belly, her eyes. She screamed. They burrowed in, and when she awoke, her skin was smooth, clean, but her veins glowed faintly in the dark, and her dreams were no longer her own. They belonged to the leeches. Chapter 42. The Bone Bell of Ulfheim. Far inland, past the great iron forests and wolf-haunted valleys, stood the ruins of Ulfheim, a village said to have vanished in a single night. No one lived there now, only echoes and wind. But some nights, when the mist was thick and time itself seemed to shiver, the sound of a bell could be heard ringing softly. It was not made of bronze or silver, but bone, a bell carved from the thigh of a Jotun, the ancient giants of the north. It hung from a dead oak in the center of the forgotten square. They say the bell was used not to call people to healing, but to warn them away. According to old skalds, the villagers of Ulfheim had once welcomed a healer from the north, a beautiful woman with silver eyes and no shadow. She promised miracles. She delivered them, but the price was memory. Each healing took a piece of the person's past, their wedding day, their child's birth, even their own name. Slowly, the village filled with people who were whole in body, but empty behind their eyes. And when the villagers realized what was happening, it was too late. They rang the bone bell and vanished. Some say the bell still rings for them. Others say it rings for you. Chapter 43. The Wound That Would Not Die. In a time of endless war between Jarls, there was a warrior named Håkon Firehand, known for his strength, his fury, and his arrogance. One day, he boasted that no blade could fell him, for he had been blessed by 3 seeresses who bathed him in wolf's blood as a child. But pride is a wound of its own. He met his match in a nameless hunter who struck him not with a sword, but with a tooth, the fang of a sea serpent, coated in black rot from the ocean's floor. The wound on Håkon's side would never close. He sought every healer, every witch, every godforsaken remedy. Nothing worked. The wound bled during battle, in sleep, in storms and silence alike. He grew pale, weakened, mad. Eventually, he found a crone in the mountains who agreed to stop the bleeding, but only if he gave her the thing he feared most. He laughed and said, "I fear nothing." She smiled and took his reflection. To this day, it is said Håkon's wound has finally closed, but he casts no shadow, no reflection. Mirrors crack in his presence, and deep in the woods, his wound waits to be opened again. Chapter 44. The Dream Sick. Among the most mysterious of Viking afflictions was the one they feared the most, a curse not of the body, but of the mind. They called it Dramsat, the dream sick. Those who caught it would fall into an endless sleep, eyes wide open, mouths whispering languages unknown to men. Their bodies wasted away, but their minds traveled. A healer once followed a dream-sick child into her slumber. She used a herb known as menigras, a silver-rooted plant that bloomed only under eclipses. The moment she drank its tea, her body slumped beside the child's. Her mind entered the dream. What she saw cannot be described. She returned after 9 days, eyes burned black, hands trembling. She whispered one word. "There are places we were never meant to heal." Then she never spoke again. And the child, she woke. But her eyes were wrong. She never blinked again. Chapter 45. The Man with 3 Hearts. Lastly, we come to one of the strangest of Viking legends, spoken only in hushed tones near funeral fires. There was once a man who could not die. He fought in 5 wars, survived 6 plagues, fell from cliffs, was burned, drowned, buried, cursed, and yet returned again and again. His name was lost, but they called him Treharda, the 3-hearted. When finally caught and opened by a mad surgeon seeking truth, they found not 3 hearts, but 1 heart, split into 3 chambers, each fed by its own soul thread. He had been born beneath a star that flickered thrice before falling, a sign, said the runes, that his spirit had been split at birth. He could heal from any wound, but he could never love. For every time he grew close to someone, one of his 3 hearts would stop, and that part of him would die forever. In the end, he begged to be undone. They say the only thing that killed him was loneliness, a sickness no healer could cure. Now, dear listeners, sleep if you can, for these are not just stories. They are warnings, carved in blood and bone and ice. And though the past is far away, the wind still carries whispers. And somewhere the leeches stir. Chapter 46. The Surgeon of the Black Shore. Beyond the fjords where no birds dared fly and the cliffs bled salt from stone, there lay a stretch of coastline known only in whispered tones as the Black Shore. Ships that sailed too close were found splintered, their crews missing or mad, speaking in tongues and drawing runes into the sand with bleeding fingers. It was here, they say, that the Surgeon of the Black Shore made his home. No one knew his true name, only that he once served as a physician aboard a longship called Drucker's Womb, famed for its raids on the shores of East. After one stormy voyage, the ship returned to harbor, half of its crew dead and the rest silent. Their bodies were whole, unscarred, but their eyes had been stitched shut. And standing at the prow, wrapped in seal-hide robes and humming an ancient dirge, was the surgeon. He claimed to have found a new form of healing, one not based on herbs or chance, but silence. He believed that pain lived not in the body, but in sound. So he began to cut, not to remove rot or arrowheads, but to quiet the body. He removed tongues to silence grief, ears to still memories, hands to stop shaking hearts. He called it the quieting. To his mind, the perfect patient was the one who could not scream, nor beg, nor weep. Some came to him willingly, warriors tormented by ghosts, widows plagued by wails of the dead. They left his hut calm, still and utterly empty. But one day, a Jarl's daughter was taken to the surgeon after falling into a rage that burned through 7 warriors. They begged him to calm her. He agreed. But when he opened her chest to silence her soul, something inside screamed back. The hut exploded into fire and mist. When the Jarl's men entered, they found no sign of the surgeon. Only the girl, wide-eyed and smiling, with her heart still beating, outside her body. It pulsed in her hand like a bird, and she walked into the waves, vanishing. The surgeon was never seen again. But sometimes, along the Black Shore, people swear they hear the soft sound of humming. And the wind carries the smell of salt, blood, and burned herbs. Chapter 47. The Cough of the Draugr. In the depths of winter, when the snow refused to melt and ice clung to even the fires, there came a plague that the Vikings could not name. It was not a fever. It was a cough, slow, dry, and cold. They called it dragrosti, the Draugr's cough. The first to catch it were those who slept near burial mounds. Then it spread to those who merely heard the coughing from afar. It wasn't long before entire villages echoed with the dry, dragging sound of unearthly breath. But the strange thing was this: the cough did not kill. Instead, it hollowed. Those afflicted slowly stopped eating. They slept standing. Their skin paled, then turned translucent. And in time, they would wander into the snow and never return. One healer, a man named Kettle Bonebinder, sought the cause. He ventured to an ancient mound where the cough had first begun. Inside, he found no bodies, only ash and bones, arranged in circles. And in the center, a blackened lung, still twitching. Kettle tried to burn it, but the fire refused to touch it. Desperate, he swallowed the lung whole, hoping to contain the curse. He succeeded, but only barely. For years, he lived as a wanderer, coughing only once a year. Each cough summoned a blizzard. Each cough brought death to a village. He tried to flee the world, exiling himself to the farthest north. But even there, the wind listens. And somewhere, deep in the ice, the lung still beats. Chapter 48. The Eyes of the Forest. In the oldest part of the dark pine forests, where no path remained and even wolves refused to howl, there grew a tree unlike any other. It had no leaves, only eyes. Eyes that blinked. Eyes that wept sap. Eyes that watched. They called it Airtra, the tree that sees. No one knew how it came to be, but the story went like this. A healer once desired to know all things, every wound, every root, every rune of the gods. She wandered from island to island, learning, carving knowledge into her skin. But it wasn't enough. She turned to forbidden rites. She tore out her own eyes in offering to the gods of knowledge, and planted them at the root of the oldest tree. When she returned, the tree had bloomed with hundreds of new eyes, and she could see through them all. Every sickness, every lie, every secret. But such vision has a cost. She went mad. She screamed until her throat tore, and her soul fled into the branches. Now the tree watches, and those who sleep near its roots often awaken knowing things they shouldn't, how they will die, what their lover hides, what the earth is whispering beneath their home. And sometimes they awaken blind. The eyes must feed, after all. Chapter 49. The Healer Who Would Not Die. There is one more tale, half myth, half omen, of a healer who defied death so many times that even Hell herself grew tired of him. He was known only as Otter of the Endless Breath. He had drowned 3 times, burned twice, been struck by lightning, and once even buried alive beneath a cairn. Each time, he returned unscarred, unchanged, unaging. Some called him blessed by the gods. Others called him a thief who had stolen a piece of time. But Otter was no man of joy. Each return robbed him of something. He forgot how to sleep, then how to taste, then how to dream. One day, he stood before a god disguised as a beggar. The god asked him, "What is your secret, healer?" Otter wept and said, "I am not healed. I am undone." The god offered him a gift, a way to die. Otter refused. He walked into the sea instead, thinking he would finally vanish. But the sea returned him, again and again. To this day, some say Otter still walks the shorelines of the north, a man with no pulse, no warmth, no shadow. A warning from the old gods. He who heals too much becomes the wound. Chapter 50. The Last Rune of Flesh. Deep within the stone-hewn cliffs of Jarn Hollow, beneath layers of moss-covered rock and bones bleached by time, there was once a hall forgotten by men but remembered by the earth. It was not built by hands, but by something older, something that carved not with tools, but with hunger. The healers of the north only spoke of it in dreams, often waking with runes burned into their flesh, runes they had no memory of drawing. It was said that the hall held the last rune of flesh, an ancient sigil whispered by the gods before they shaped the first man from driftwood and ash. This rune did not heal. It did not hurt. It rewrote. Legend told of a healer woman named Svala Skullsister who sought the rune in desperation. Her daughter had been born twisted and cold, with no breath and no cry. The seers called it fate. The priests called it a curse. But Svala called it unfinished. She defied all counsel and journeyed alone into the bowels of the mountain, clutching bones of her child and the teeth of her ancestors. The way was treacherous. The deeper she went, the louder the earth breathed. Walls pulsed with veins of stone. Torches refused to burn. And then she saw it, a chamber where the floor was skin, and the ceiling blinked slowly, like a giant eye. At the center stood a stone obelisk covered in writhing flesh, not carved, but growing. Upon it pulsed a single rune, shaped like a spiral with a tear in its middle. The rune of flesh. Svala pressed her daughter's skull to the rune. The chamber screamed. She awoke outside the mountain with her daughter alive, breathing, crying, whole, but not unchanged. The child grew fast, too fast. At 2 winters, she spoke in runes older than speech. By 5, her shadow walked apart from her body. By 10, Svala could no longer look her in the eye. One day, the girl turned to her and said, "Mother, I remember before the gods." Svala vanished that night, and the girl wandered into the forest, leaving only skin behind. Not a body, just skin, folded neatly, as if it had stepped out of itself. Chapter 51. The Bleeding Stone. There was once a stone in the village of Skegerford that bled every full moon. It was not a sacred place, nor a burial mound, just a cold, gray slab jutting out from the ground like a giant's tongue. But each month, as the moon rose fat and silver, the stone would sweat red, thick, dark blood with a scent of iron and rot. At first, the villagers feared it. Then they came to use it. A healer named Ingvar the Hollow began collecting the blood in wooden bowls. He found that any wound smeared with it would close instantly. Flesh would knit. Fevers would break. Blind eyes would see. It was a miracle. Until one day, he used it on a dying man who had been gored by a bear. The man lived, but his shadow did not follow him. It moved of its own accord. It watched Ingvar in the night. Then one by one, the healed began to change. They could no longer sleep. They wept blood. They spoke only in dreams, dreams not their own. And all of them, at the end, walked to the bleeding stone and vanished into it. Ingvar tried to stop using the blood, but the stone bled more. One night, it bled so much the ground turned to mud. And when the sun rose, the village was gone. Only the stone remained clean, dry, and warm to the touch. Chapter 52. The Needle Mother. In a distant fjord where winter came early and never quite left, there lived an old midwife known as Needle Mother Frida. She had long white hair, fingers like willow roots, and a face creased with every sorrow she'd ever delivered into the world. But her gift was not birth. It was binding. When children were born cursed, with the mark of the wolf, or the skin of ash, or the cry that shatters bone, the villagers brought them to her. And with her ancient needle, made from a tooth of some long-dead sea beast, she would sew the curse shut, thread through the breath, not in the soul, and the child would be normal. But each stitch had a cost. A part of the curse remained. Some children could not feel pain. Others would bleed dreams into the snow. Some never blinked, even in sleep. And one, it was said, had no bones, only skin held in place by her threads. Frida kept a book of stitches, each one a rune of its own, drawn not with ink, but with blood-soaked thread. When she died, they buried her in a hollow log. The next morning, the log was empty, and the village children all had stitches that weren't there before, even the ones never brought to her. Chapter 53. The Tongue That Heals and Lies. There was once a man named Eric Two Tongues, a healer unlike any the North had known. His voice was soft, his touch cold, and his cures came not through herbs or iron, but through words. He could speak sickness out of the body, or so it was believed. It began when a child with black boils came to his hall. Eric leaned close, whispered something into her left ear, just 3 words in a language no one knew. The next morning, the boils were gone. The village hailed him as touched by the gods. Soon, people came from fjords and forests far and wide, each seeking the whisper that healed. A man with frostbitten limbs. A woman whose dreams bled into waking. A child born with a heart that beat like a drum of war. To each, Eric whispered, and each was healed. But none remembered what he had said. Over time, people began to change. Not all at once, but subtly. A man who had once limped began walking too quietly, as if the ground avoided him. A woman who'd been healed of madness began answering questions no one had asked. The healed no longer feared fire. They no longer aged. And none of them ever spoke of Eric again. When a wandering skald grew suspicious and visited the healer's hall, he found Eric sitting in silence before a black mirror of polished obsidian. The skald asked, "Why do they forget your words?" Eric turned, and his jaw split in two. 2 tongues uncoiled, one red, one black. "They do not forget," he whispered. "They become my words." The skald fled, but he never reached the next village. His tongue was found, still wet, still whispering. Chapter 54. The Breathless Choir Beneath the Ice. Far to the north, beyond the Wolf's Teeth Mountains and the frozen sea, there was said to be a glacier where no wind howled, no birds flew, and no breath could be drawn. The glacier was known as Vital-Jawed, the White Song. No one knew why, until one winter, a band of desperate travelers crossed it, searching for shelter. As they stepped onto the ice, they heard it, a song. Faint, wordless, haunting. It echoed from beneath their feet, not above. They believed it was a trick of the wind, but there was no wind. They walked further. The singing grew louder. When they camped for the night, the fire refused to burn. Their breath hung in the air, but no smoke rose from their mouths. The next morning, one of them was missing. In his place, a perfectly shaped hole in the ice. Smooth, mouth-shaped. And from it came a voice, his voice singing. One by one, they vanished, and the glacier sang louder. A healer named Liv, the last survivor, tried to run. She made it to the edge, frostbitten and bleeding, dragging her frozen foot. When she awoke in a fishing village days later, she could no longer breathe. Not in, not out. But she still spoke, endlessly. She sang of things beneath the ice, of mouths with no face, of lungs that never learned to stop. Her breathless song spread like fever. Now, every full moon, if you stand on the edge of Vital-Jawed and listen close, you will hear hundreds of voices humming, all in unison. All waiting. Chapter 55. The Surgeon Who Stitched Time. There was once a physician named Thormodr, known as the Needle Eater. He was not born of woman, or so he claimed. They said he arrived during a blood eclipse, stepping out of a whale carcass that washed ashore, wrapped in linen, holding a silver needle longer than a sword. Thormodr did not heal wounds. He reversed them. A man stabbed through the chest would walk again as if no blade had touched him, the wound unhappening. A woman who had lost her arm years ago awoke to find it returned, but younger, pale, and hairless like a child's. His patients would speak strangely after. They'd recall events that never occurred. Some aged backward. Some forgot their names. One old sailor, who came in blind, left with perfect sight, but spoke only in the tongue of men not yet born. Thormodr wrote nothing. Instead, he stitched scrolls of flesh, twisting skin into timelines, muscle into runes, blood into ink. His greatest patient was a dying jarl, pierced by 9 arrows and a spear through the neck. Thormodr placed a needle into the man's heart, and time slowed. The jarl hung between heartbeats for 7 days, neither dying nor living, while Thormodr stitched his entire life backward, thread by thread. When he was finished, the jarl awoke as a baby, crying, newborn, but with old eyes. Thormodr vanished that night. Only his needle remained, buried in the center of the village square, vibrating slightly, ticking like a clock. Chapter 56. the skin that remembered too much. There was once a leathersmith in the frost-choked village of Norhelm, known only as Jorah. She did not stitch shoes or saddles like the others. Her skill lay in crafting healing skins, thin, pliable sheets that could be laid over wounds and sealed with heat and breath. The injured would heal in days, with no scars, no pain. But no one knew where the leather came from. One day, a curious boy named Halfie followed her into the woods. What he saw drove him mad. She was speaking to the skins, dozens of them, hanging from the trees, fluttering like ghosts. Not animal hides. These had faces, mouths that whispered, eyes stitched shut. Jorah's skins could not only heal, they could remember. A hunter who wore one began recalling battles he'd never fought. A farmer gained memories of childbirth, though he'd never fathered a child. An old woman who wrapped her hands in Jorah's work began playing the harp like a master, weeping over songs she'd never heard. Jorah had learned to tan memory into skin, but memory is heavier than flesh. Over time, her patients changed. They stopped speaking in their own voices. Their dreams belonged to strangers. Some began digging graves they did not remember digging, and sobbing at names they never knew. Jorah's last work was a full-body skin, meant to raise her dead lover from the grave. She sewed it from a dozen donors, each whispering in their sleep. But when she wrapped the skin around the corpse, it sat up, screamed, and ran into the sea. They say it still floats near the coast, begging for its name. Chapter 57. The Blood God's Apprentice. Among the windswept peaks of the Daggercliff Mountains, there lived an outcast healer known as Cale the Pale. He wore no cloak, no boots, even in snowstorms. His body steamed, blood forever hot. He was not born with this gift. It was given. By Blen, the ancient blood god whispered of in forbidden chants. Cale was found as a boy, cradling a dead goat, drinking its blood. He claimed the goat had whispered to him, that it had taught him things. And when he grew older, he could do things no other healer dared. He could bleed people on purpose and heal them. He'd slice open a wrist and remove fever, cut beneath the eye and drain out madness, open the belly and draw forth despair. Villagers lined up to be bled by Cale. Some were healed, others vanished. He spoke in a language that made ears ring and teeth ache. Blood on his hands never dried. His knife was not iron, but a sharpened shard of black glass that pulsed. One night, he bled a dying child, only to find no sickness in her veins, only whispers. She died screaming. Cale laughed. I taught her too well, he said. The villagers revolted. They chained him, buried him beneath the mountain. But the next spring, every newborn in the valley was born with a red mark over their heart, shaped like a knife. And every full moon, their veins glow. They sing in sleep. Cale is gone, but the blood god remembers. Chapter 58. The Bone Wife and Her Garden of Spines. There was a cottage near the edge of the deadwood, wreathed in thorns and silence, where none dared tread. It belonged to Astrid Bone Wife. No one remembered when she arrived. She looked 30, sounded 300. Her voice had the crunch of gravel. Her back was bent, but her hands were strong enough to twist iron. She was not a healer of flesh or blood. She dealt in bone. When warriors returned broken, shattered by axe or fall, she would reforge them, not with splints or bandages, but with other bones, bones that moved. She'd insert an infant's rib into a grown man's spine, and it would twist to match. She'd hammer wolf femurs into shattered legs, and the patient would walk, run by nightfall. Her patients grew strong, too strong. They could bend iron bars, bite through wood, hear things they should not. Astrid's cottage was surrounded by a garden, but no flowers grew there, only bones. Hundreds, arranged in rows, humming softly. Each belonged to someone she had taken from. When asked why she grew bones like crops, she answered, "Because flesh lies, blood forgets, but bone remembers who we truly are." One day, the bones in the garden began to rise, not with muscle or sinew, but with will. They walked. They surrounded her cottage. They began to hum her name. The villagers fled. Now, only bones remain. And at the garden center, a new flower grows, white and sharp, petals like jawbones, stem like a finger. It whispers in Astrid's voice, and it is still growing. Chapter 59. The Heart of the Mountain That Would Not Die. High above the fjords, where winds screamed like widows and no birds flew, the red maw yawned open, a jagged cave in the heart of the Skelterfell mountain. The villagers feared it, said it swallowed those who wandered too near, said the wind that blew from it smelled of iron and rot. But in the time of the Great Famine, a desperate healer named Drenger Foreskin dared to enter. He was searching for the heart. The legend spoke of it, a living organ, pulsing at the center of the mountain, older than the gods. Neither beast nor god, nor man, but something between. A chunk of eternal, undying flesh that could heal any wound, feed the starving, and even, if prepared correctly, bring back the dead. Drenger went in with 30 men. Only one returned, blind, hairless, bleeding from the eyes. He carried no torch, only a small bundle wrapped in frost-stiff cloth. Inside, a fragment of the heart. It pulsed. Drenger used it first to regrow a child's severed hand, then to raise a drowned boy after 3 days underwater, then to regrow his own withered leg. But the heart demanded offerings. The more miracles it gave, the hungrier it grew. Soon, Drenger was feeding it more than scraps. Lambs, dogs, then deer, then beggars, prisoners, the dying, and then the living. He built a temple of flesh beneath his home. His followers wore cloaks sewn from skin. They drank a thin red broth that made their wounds vanish and their sleep dreamless. But one day, the heart changed. It grew eyes and a mouth. It began whispering. It did not want to be fed. It wanted to feed. That winter, every child born in the valley had no heartbeat, because the heart had taken them all. Chapter 60. The Plague Eater's Mask. When the Great Soot Plague came to the northern coast, Entire villages fell in days. Skin turned black, tongues swelled, eyes bled. Death moved on the wind. But then came Urja, a masked woman from across the sea. She wore robes of thick waxed cloth and a mask carved from pale driftwood, long and sharp like a bird's beak, filled with herbs and ash. She called herself a plague eater. She entered sick homes alone, carried a black sack, and stayed for hours. When she left, the plague would be gone. Not cured.
Gone.
The sick would vanish.
So would their beds.
Their shadows. Even their names. Villagers whispered. They were unmade. One day, a boy followed her into a hut. Inside, he saw her unmask. She had no mouth, only writhing threads of red. They reached out, touched the sick, sifted through them like fingers searching for ripe fruit. When she fed on a dying man's breath, he didn't die. He never was.
His family forgot him.
His axe rusted. His boots crumbled. His house stood empty, as though he'd never lived at all. Urja was not a healer. She was an eraser of pain and of people. She did not save. She unwrote. And in the end, when the plague was done and only a few hundred souls remained, she vanished. But her mask remained, hanging on a branch outside a burned house. If you wear it, they say, you can walk among the dying untouched. But beware, you may forget your own name by the time you take it off. Chapter 61. The Throat That Swallowed Fire. Among the coastal people of Vetfara, there was a tale of Sven the Hollow, a mute boy with coal-black eyes who never cried, never coughed, and never spoke, until the fire took the village. One autumn, raiders came with pitch-soaked arrows and rage. The longhouse burned. Families screamed. But Sven walked into the flames and swallowed them. Witnesses say his mouth opened wider than a man's head, and the flames vanished down his gullet. His skin did not burn. His breath smelled of ash. From that night forward, Sven could cure any illness, but only by breathing into the sick. His breath was smoke and heat. He burned away the sickness. Sometimes he burned away more. A girl with a cold left his hut as a pile of soot. A blind man could see again, but only by day. By night, his eyes glowed, and he screamed at things no one else could see. A woman's broken leg was mended, but her bones became brittle as glass. She shattered when she fell on ice. Sven began collecting fire in clay pots, buried beneath his floor.
He said it spoke to him,
taught him things. Eventually, he opened his throat to teach others the way. 3 children followed him. None lived past their 13th winter. Their throats caught fire from within. Their eyes became twin candles in the dark, and they sang when they died. Now, the wind that rushes through the abandoned hut where Sven once lived sounds like distant singing. If you listen too long, you'll start to hum along. And if you do, your tongue may begin to smoke. Chapter 62. The Gut Master of Allskag. In the frostbitten village of Allskag, where no sun rose for 3 months each year, there lived a man called Erveller, known in whispers as the Gut Master. He was not a healer in the traditional sense. No, claimed that all illness, fever, madness, and even curses lived inside the gut like worms in a tree trunk. And so he cut people open to clean them out. Villagers would come to him with pain in their bellies, and he would smile gently, lay them on the wooden slab in his snow-chilled hut, and whisper, "There is rot in you. I will root it out." He used a long, hooked bone knife. No metal, only sharpened reindeer rib. He said steel sang too loud and frightened the sickness. He would open the belly, remove the entrails carefully, rinse them in icy water steeped with pine ash and owl blood, then place them back, tangle by tangle, like threads in a tapestry. Most patients died, but the few who lived they changed. They ate only raw things, snow mushrooms, lichens, worms. They no longer dreamt, and some said they had no heartbeat, only a faint gurgling, like a stream under ice. One woman who survived surgery bore a child the next winter. The boy was born already whispering. At 2 years old, he spoke 12 languages. At 4, he stopped speaking altogether and began writing symbols in blood and chalk on the walls. By 7, he walked into the mountains naked and was never seen again. They say found the perfect balance of bile, blood, and bone. And they say the gut remembers, even after death. His bone knife still hangs above the hearth in Allskag's long-abandoned temple. Sometimes it drips. Chapter 63. The Corpse That Bled Backward. Long ago, during the plague winters, a child named Aska was found dead in the snow. White-haired, pale as milk, lips blue. Her mother, mad with grief, refused to bury her. Instead, she wrapped Aska in bear pelts and sat beside her for 9 nights, whispering lullabies and feeding her drops of honeyed milk. On the 10th night, Aska blinked, but she had changed. Her veins ran black. Her breath was cold as frost. And when she wept, her tears rolled upward. She began to speak, but only in reverse. She would say death instead of life, cold instead of warm, and sometimes laughed when others cried. And she bled backward. When she was cut, the blood flowed inward, into her skin. Wounds sealed instantly. Scars vanished. Illness fled from her touch. People came from across the aisles to be healed by the girl who had reversed death. But every person she healed paid a cost. One man's daughter lived, but forgot who he was. A chieftain's broken leg mended, but his mind unraveled, and he barked like a dog until he was put down. Aska grew older, but backward. At 15, she became 12. At 12, 9. She eventually disappeared into the woods, a child again, and never came back. Some say she still wanders, healing in reverse, giving back breath, but stealing memory, time, or pieces of soul. And in winter, if you listen at twilight, you might hear her crying softly and in reverse. Chapter 64. The Surgeon Who Stitched Himself into the Sky. Among the storm-tossed cliffs of the Bleeding Coast lived Agnor Valbrun, once a warrior, later a surgeon, always half-mad. He believed that the human body was never meant to remain separate. "We are threads of a greater cloth," he would mutter, "and I will sew us back together." He began by stitching wolf sinew into his own arms, then bear muscle into his chest, then fish skin over his bones. He survived somehow. Not healthy, not quite alive, just continuing. He opened a clinic by the cliffside, a crude tent of stitched sails and seabird wings. There, he offered binding surgery, fusing the injured with parts of beasts or even one another. A man with a missing arm was given the arm of his dead brother. Two lovers, inseparable in life, were literally sewn together at the spine. A mute child was given the tongue of a raven. And then Agnor looked upward. He claimed the stars were wounds in the skin of the sky, and he would stitch them shut. He climbed the cliff one morning at dawn, dragging a long coil of silver-threaded whale tendon. He disappeared into the fog. The stars did not change. But when people went to his tent, they found his skin folded neatly on the ground. His needles still twitched in the salt breeze. And on stormy nights, if you look toward the northern sky, you may see a faint silver scar stretching across the darkness, thread by thread, star by star. Chapter 65. The Widow Who Harvested Dreams. In the fog-shrouded village of Skarnvik, on the edge of the ash forests, there lived an old widow known only as Mir Svefn, Mother Sleep. Her husband had died decades ago, crushed beneath a landslide. Her children, swallowed by the sea in the storm of black waves. Since then, she had spoken to no one. But people still came to her doorstep. Because they knew, if you could not sleep, Mir Svefn would find a way. She claimed to treat not the flesh, but the spirit. The body can endure pain, she once whispered to a trembling warrior, but no one survives sleeplessness. Her cure was the dromsop, a thick black draught brewed in a cauldron carved from whalebone. The potion stank of rot and flowers, sweet and foul at once. It was said to be made from crushed nightshade, dried bat hearts, and the tears of weeping moss scraped from tombstones. Those who drank it would fall into sleep so deep it might as well be death. And in that sleep, they would dream vividly, dreams that Mir Svefn would harvest. She claimed that dreams were like fruit, ripening within the soul. If left alone too long, they would rot, bringing madness, insomnia, or visions of the dead. She used long silver needles to extract the dreams from the forehead of the sleeper, threading them into small leather pouches, sealed with wax.
No one knew what she did with them.
Some said she sold them to spirits in the woods. Others claimed she wore them under her cloak, letting the dreams whisper to her, guiding her through past and future. But sometimes the sleepers never woke. Their eyes would remain closed forever, breath shallow but steady, trapped in the last dream they had ever known. They would be buried with coins on their eyes, not for the ferryman, but to weigh down the lids, lest the dream try to escape. To this day, wandering shepherds claim to see her walking through the woods at night, eyes glowing faintly beneath her hood, trailing the faint scent of withered roses and burnt feathers. Chapter 66. The Man Who Bottled Souls. In the port town of Kvalheim, where the sea met the mountains in crashing fury, there lived a man called Ervold Hrafnsson, a former runecaster turned soul healer. He was said to have been cursed by Odin himself, struck blind for trying to see beyond the veil of hell. But blindness made his other senses sharp. He heard illness. He tasted grief. He felt when someone's spirit had begun to decay. Ervold believed that all human suffering came from a fractured soul, and so he invented the glass ritual. In a cold, windowless cellar, lit only by oil lamps and humming wind chimes made of bones, Ervold performed his rituals. He would ask the afflicted to lie naked on a stone slab. He would draw sacred runes on their chest with ink made from squid blood and wolf bile. Then, using a tiny funnel carved from antler, he would whisper into their mouth a single word, a name no one but he knew. The patient would seize. Their body would contort, and slowly, from their open mouth, a faint mist would begin to rise. Ervold would capture it in a hand-blown glass orb, each soul fragment glowing with a different hue. Once bottled, he would place it in a case of dozens, each labeled with names, dates, and conditions. But he never gave the soul back. Instead, he replaced it with something else. No one knew what, only that the patient often returned healed. Or stranger. Some forgot their names. Others forgot pain altogether, laughing as their fingers broke or their eyes wept blood. A few were found wandering the hills at night, whispering in languages no one recognized, staring up at the stars as if waiting for them to fall. One day, Ervold vanished. His house was found abandoned, except for the cellar. There, the case of soul orbs still sat. One smashed accidentally by a foolish thief. He screamed for 3 nights straight, until his throat tore open.
No one goes near the house now.
The orbs still glow faintly in the dark, like watching eyes. Chapter 67. The Tongueless Priest of Blodheim. Deep in the crimson forests of Blodheim, where the trees wept sap like blood, stood a crooked stave church made entirely of bones. And in it preached Broder the Tongueless, a priest of the old ways. He had once been a warrior shaman, but when he invoked forbidden words during a battle chant, the gods struck him mute, his tongue shriveled to ash in his mouth. Yet still he spoke. He used knots, runes, guttural breaths that made bones ache and ears ring. He healed with silence. He blessed the wounded by placing their heads against the skull-shaped altar and humming into their ears, low and deep, like a bear's growl. But his most famous act was the ritual of severance. It was said to remove not just pain, but the memory of pain. A woman who had lost her child in childbirth came to him, broken and hollow. He bound her arms, painted her body in ash and spit, and performed the severance. She walked away smiling, forgetting she ever had a child, but also forgetting language, and color, and her name. She lived the rest of her days quietly in the woods, humming songs no one had ever heard. Broder kept their memories in clay jars, sealed with blood wax, buried beneath the altar. People said if you opened one, the sorrow would leap into you like fire. One man tried. He was never sad again, but also never happy. He stared blankly at everything, feeling nothing, not even when his house burned with his family inside. Chapter 68. The Leech Wife of Norvatten. In the cold lake village of Norvatten, where the waters never fully thawed and the mist clung to the bones of fishermen like moss, there lived a woman called Askri Leechwife. No one knew her true age. Her skin hung in folds like old parchment. Her eyes were clouded with cataracts, but she saw more clearly than anyone else. They said her husband had drowned long ago, and yet she kept a place set for him each night, a cold bowl of stew steaming gently in the dark. Askri healed with leeches, but not ordinary ones. She raised them herself, fed them blood from ravens, bathed them in the tears of mourning mothers, and whispered to them at night in a tongue no one had heard since the age of trolls. When someone fell ill, boils, fevers, madness, she would bring her bucket of sacred leeches. Each was named. Each had a purpose. Scully was for curses. Thorn was for broken hearts. Ursa was said to remove memories if left on the nape of the neck long enough. The leeches burrowed, not just into the skin but into the soul, they said. The patient would scream, thrash, cry out for mercy. But after the leeches were full, many claimed to feel lighter, emptied of their burdens. Some, however, never woke up. Their veins turned black as ink. Their blood, thick, clotted, crawling beneath the skin as if still alive. Askri would burn these bodies, not for burial, not for honor, but so that the leeches couldn't return to the lake. Because once, many years ago, she had thrown them in, and the lake turned red for 3 days. Fishermen still claimed to see her walking the shoreline at dusk, humming lullabies to the water, her bucket swaying, full of things that writhe and whisper. Chapter 69. The Man Who Dug Through Bones. Far to the north, beyond the wolf-haunted hills of Dreckerholt, there was a mountain called Svarthorn, Black Horn. At its base was a cave no one entered willingly. And in that cave lived a man called Hallmundr the Breaker. He was no healer in the traditional sense. He was a bone witch, a breaker of bodies to find truth and balance. He believed that pain was a path to knowledge, and that inside every bone was a story waiting to be freed. When someone came to him, twisted in agony, or possessed by tremors of the spirit, he would first chant over their body. Then he would begin his work, not with scalpels, but with rocks. He would crack the bones slowly, femurs, ribs, collarbones, and listen to the sound they made. If they sang, he said the spirit was still strong. If they splintered like dry wood, the person's fate was sealed. He set the bones afterward, with mud and moss and strips of bare hide. Some lived, many did not, but those who survived became changed. One man claimed he could hear the wind speaking after Hallmundr broke his spine and rebuilt it with birchwood splints. A girl whose skull he cracked open to release the ghosts began drawing runes she had never learned, runes that glowed faintly in the dark. They say Hallmundr kept a garden of bones outside his cave. Every rib, tibia, and skull planted in careful rows, like crops. He believed they grew ideas. And sometimes, when the wind blew just right, you could hear the bones whispering to each other. Chapter 70. The Boy Who Was Born with Teeth of Iron. In a windswept village atop the cliffs of Skelgard, a woman screamed as she gave birth under the blood moon. The child came early, wrapped in a caul of black membrane, his eyes open, and his mouth full of metal teeth. They named him Kettle Jarnman Ironmouth. At first, the village wanted to kill him. Surely he was cursed, a beast, a sign of Ragnarok. But the old Volva, wise woman of the north, intervened. Do not kill what the gods have marked. Use him. And so Kettle was raised in shadows, fed bone broth and ash. He never spoke, only growled and gnashed his teeth. But when people were in pain, crippling, soul-crushing pain, he would bite them, and the pain would vanish, not like magic, like theft. He took it into himself. He would seize and convulse afterward, eyes rolling white, blood pouring from his nose. But the person he bit? They would rise, gasping, smiling through tears. Some came to kettle for grief. Some came for madness. He took it all, but as he grew, so did the burden. The boy aged too quickly. His skin turned pale as wax. His eyes blackened. He stopped eating. He stopped sleeping. They said the pain inside him had begun to speak in many voices. He wandered the cliffs alone, murmuring to himself, chewing on stones, his iron teeth never dulling. One day, he vanished during a thunderstorm. All that remained was his cloak and a row of perfectly preserved teeth, still warm, still humming with unseen power. They were placed in a wooden box, buried under the vulva's hut. And now, when healers fail, the desperate sometimes return to dig for them. But no one who opens the box has ever been seen again. Only the sound of grinding metal lingers in the air. Chapter 71. The Girl Who Swallowed the Moon. In the icy hinterlands beyond the Whalegrave shore, there was a girl named Brynja born beneath a total lunar eclipse. As the midwife lifted her from her mother's torn body, the child looked skyward, and the moon, they say, blinked. Brynja never cried. Not once. She grew fast, silent, pale as moonlight. She walked alone, even as a toddler, whispering to things no one could see. Animals avoided her. Shadows clung to her ankles like pets. When her village was struck by a terrible plague, black tongues, bleeding eyes, breath that came out in frost, Brynja did not fall ill. Instead, she began to eat the sickness. At night, she would crawl into the huts of the dying and breathe into their mouths. The next day they would be healed, but Brynja would look worse. Her veins turned silver. Her eyes lost their color. She coughed up feathers. She vomited starlight. Some believed she was divine. Others cursed. One night, a seer came from the coast, blind in both eyes, led by wolves. She saw Brynja and screamed, throwing herself into the sea rather than speak the girl's true name. It was then the villagers realized the truth. Brynja wasn't healing them. She was storing the disease, holding it, feeding it. Her body, impossibly, became a prison for every plague, fever, curse, and madness the North had known, until she vanished. On the longest night of the year, with the moon full and silent, she walked naked into the sea. Not a ripple marked her passing. Only the water grew warm for a moment, steaming with some inner light, then cold again. Years later, a sailor washed ashore, raving about a pale girl sitting on the seabed, glowing, her eyes filled with the stars of the underworld. And wherever she was spotted, strange things followed, healing and horror in equal measure. Chapter 72. The Breath Stealer of Eastjal. In the foothills of Eastjal, there lived a man called Ragnar Kvaltandi, Ragnar the Strangler. He had once been a berserker, feared on every battlefield from Gotland to Lindisfarne, until a blade took his voice and left a scar across his throat.
He could not speak,
but he could take breath. After the war, broken and voiceless, Ragnar lived alone in a cave, until a boy, sick with lung rot, was brought to him in desperation. The tale says Ragnar took the boy in his arms and breathed in, not just air, but the sickness itself. The boy gasped, then coughed clear. He stood. Ragnar, meanwhile, collapsed, chest rising and falling like bellows filled with flame. He had taken the disease, and he survived it. This became his gift and his curse. People came for miles, offering silver, goats, even the bones of ancestors, to have their breath taken. Ragnar would press his mouth to theirs and draw in what ailed them: fevers, wheezing, curses. But each breath stayed inside him. His chest grew misshapen. He could no longer sleep. He groaned in agony, filled with 1,000 torments, every breath a scream that never escaped. One day, he took in the breath of a dying Jarl, but this time he did not survive it. When they found his body, it was still warm, eyes wide, mouth agape. His chest rose and fell unnaturally, as if still breathing. They buried him under a cairn of snow and stone. But travelers speak of hearing a low gasping sound near Eastjol, carried on the wind, as if a man were suffocating forever. Chapter 73. The Surgeon of the Hollow Tree. Deep in the wolf woods of western Norgard, there stands a tree, twisted, blackened, yet never dead. A great hollow lives at its base, large enough for a man to crawl through, and inside lives the surgeon. No one knows his true name. Some say he was once a slave who learned to cut flesh in the name of healing. Others claim he was born of the forest itself, grown from bark and blood. The surgeon does not live among people. People come to him. They find the tree by dream, not map. They wake with black sap on their feet and a whisper in their ears. I can fix what breaks. He does not charge coin, only silence. You must not scream. You must not beg. You must not speak a single word while he works. If you do, he stops, and you leave as you came or not at all. His methods are ancient. He uses insect stingers as needles, bird bones as probes, moss poultices soaked in honey and witch's blood. He cuts precisely, lovingly, and when he sews, he hums. Some say he doesn't just heal injuries. He improves them. A lame man walked away stronger. A blind woman came back, seeing stars no one else could see. A madman returned whispering truths of the gods that melted minds. But not everyone leaves the hollow tree.
Some are kept.
Added to it, the tree, they say, grows faces in the bark, eyes that weep sap, mouths that move when no wind blows. The surgeon never ages, never eats, never speaks. He simply waits for the next broken thing to crawl inside and be made whole, or be added to the roots. Chapter 74. The Bloodseer of Skardholm. There is a fjord where the sun barely touches the waves, a shadowed place called Skardholm, the Scarred Island. It is said the rocks there drink blood, and no plant grows that does not taste iron. Upon its highest cliff stood a shrine, blackened by soot, soothed by the constant shriek of gulls. And within that shrine lived a woman known only as Sephabloga, Sephablood Eye. She was a bloodseer, a practitioner of the lost art of Bulvika, the reading of fate through human veins. No knife of bronze or steel ever touched her hand. Her tools were bone shards, sharpened by seawater and sleepless nights. Her altar was always warm, for blood was always fresh upon it. Those who sought her counsel did not ask with words, they bled for her. They slit a finger, or the inside of a thigh, or the skin beneath the tongue, and let the blood drip into her wooden bowl. And then she would see. She would stir the blood with a raven's feather and begin to whisper. Futures, deaths, betrayals. She knew when ships would sink and when kings would die. She foretold plagues by the thickness of a clot. She once tasted a man's blood and told him the day and hour he would be murdered by his own son. The man laughed and was proven wrong by only 7 minutes. But there was a price. Her gift devoured her from within. Her eyes turned red, not from disease, but from visions too dark for the gods themselves. Her skin cracked. Her nails curled. Her sleep became nothing but screaming. She began to keep her own blood in little bottles, lining the walls of the shrine, using them to read her own future, desperate to escape the fate she had seen. But it never changed. One winter, the waves froze solid for 3 days, something no man had seen in living memory. And when they reached her shrine, they found only feathers, red ones, and a bowl still warm with blood. No one knows what became of her, but every bloodseer since has carved her name into their forearms as protection, Sepha. 3 letters, to ward off madness, or invite it. Chapter 75. The Toothsmith of the Underhall. In the volcanic tunnels beneath Drekagard, where the earth sweats sulfur and the walls tremble with distant growls, lives a man who should not be alive. His name is Agnir Kimberjot, Agnir the Jawbreaker. He is the last of the Toothsmiths, a forgotten order of bone menders who once served the Jarls of the deep mines. They were known for shaping teeth from obsidian and replacing shattered jaws with hinges of whalebone. Agnir went further. He believed that the mouth was the gate of the soul. And so, to fix the soul, one must begin with the teeth. His patients came screaming, their mouths ruined by frostbite, or shattered in combat, or cursed by witches to chew their own tongues. He took them in, worked by the glow of lava and the clicking of jawbones. He did not use anesthesia. Instead, he bound his patients in sealskin cocoons, forced fermented honey between their teeth, and began his work as they drifted between pain and dream. His replacements were legendary. Teeth made of iron, or polished amber, or hollowed bone filled with herbs. Some mouths he restructured entirely, gifting them new ways to speak, or scream, or chant songs long dead. But the power corrupted. He began to experiment, removing healthy teeth, installing extra jaws, giving men tusks like boars, or silver fangs that sang when they clashed. His greatest creation was a tongue of copper, forked like a serpent's, given to a mute shield maiden. With it, she sang a death song that caused 5 men to collapse, bleeding from their ears. Eventually, the people of Drekagard revolted. They sealed Agnir in his underhall, behind a wall of stone and screams. But now and then, travelers speak of voices rising from deep cracks in the earth, chattering like teeth, singing with metal tongues. Some believe Agnir still works below, and that he's perfecting a new design, a mouth that never stops feeding. Chapter 76. The Midwife Who Births Shadows. In the village of Myrtle, where the sun forgets to rise in winter, there lived an old midwife named Ursa Huldrahand, Ursa of the Hidden Hand. She was born with one hand made not of flesh, but smoke. This was not a metaphor. It moved like mist, and yet could lift blades, stitch wounds, or cradle infants without ever warming them. She was not feared. She was worshipped, for she brought children into the world that no other hands could guide. Twins wrapped around each other like snakes. Babies with 3 hearts. Infants born with the memories of the dead. Ursa birthed them all and whispered their names into the wind before their first cry. But one night the wrong child came, a girl with eyes like glass and a heart that did not beat. Ursa did not flinch. She smiled. She took the girl and hid her, raised her beneath the floorboards of her hut, feeding her on ink and milk, teaching her to read the Book of Shadows, a leather tome that could only be opened by firelight and only read by those who had touched death. The girl grew.
Fast.
Too fast. She began to steal the voices of other children. She spoke in bird tongues, and her shadow moved even when she did not. Ursa did not stop her. She encouraged her. For Ursa believed that healing was not only for bodies, but for the world itself. And sometimes the world needed to be cut open and reborn. On the night of the black storm, the girl vanished. So did Ursa. Only the Book of Shadows remained, smoldering, but unburned. Today, it is said that every time a child is born in Myrtle with no shadow, a crow lands on the window ledge, carrying a drop of milk and a sliver of smoke in its beak. And far away, a voice whispers, "The midwife is watching."